11 weeks. That is how long the Mariana Islands have had to recover from the strongest tropical cyclone to make landfall anywhere on Earth this year. Some families there are still living in tents. Parts of the power grid are still down. And now, the fourth typhoon of a record-breaking Pacific season is bearing down on the same battered islands along nearly the same track, with forecasters warning it will explode. Typhoon Bobby is carrying winds of about 80 miles per hour right now. The official forecast calls for nearly double that by Monday, a Category 4 or 5 super typhoon sweeping through the island chain Sunday into Monday. But here is the part worth your attention. That explosion has not happened yet, and the forecasters called it days in advance. By the end of this video, you will know how they can tell and where the real danger lies. Late Wednesday night, local time, a sprawling cluster of thunderstorms over the open Pacific east of Guam pulled itself into a spin and earned a name, Tropical Storm Bobby. That was not the story. That was the ignition. By early Friday, barely a day and a half later, Bobby had strengthened into a typhoon, the Western Pacific's word for a hurricane, a storm with sustained winds of at least 74 miles per hour. As of Friday, the storm sits more than 600 miles east of Guam, carrying maximum sustained winds of about 80 miles per hour and moving west-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. On the scale forecasters use, that is a minimal typhoon, a Category 1. The forecast is anything but minimal. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center, the U.S. military's forecast arm for Pacific storms, expects Bobby to undergo rapid intensification over the coming days, climbing to Category 4 or 5 strength before it reaches the Mariana Islands. Peak winds are projected in the range of 145 to 155 miles per hour. At 150, a storm crosses into a class with its own name, Super Typhoon. The center of Bobby is expected to sweep through the island chain Saipan, Tinian, Rota, and Guam sometime Sunday into Monday, local time. And with each new advisory, that arrival has been nudging slightly earlier. Nearly double the wind, in roughly 3 days, aimed at a thin chain of islands. But the map matters less than who is standing on it, because the islands under that forecast cone are not starting from zero. They are starting from minus. On Saipan, Friday morning, the sound of the coming weekend was plywood, boards going back over windows that were repaired only weeks ago. Across the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Rota, and Guam, an American territory of roughly 220,000 people, preparation has a muscle memory now, and it is fresher than anyone would want. 11 weeks ago, in mid-April, Super Typhoon Sinlaku came through this same stretch of ocean and made landfall in the northern Marianas at Category 4 equivalent strength. It remains to this day the strongest tropical cyclone to make landfall anywhere on Earth in 2026. The islands are still inside that storm's aftermath. Power has not been fully restored across the northern Marianas. Some families whose homes were destroyed are still living in tents. Sinlaku killed no one on land, but 6 crew members were lost when a cargo ship overturned in its seas, and after more than 100 hours of searching, only one was found. That grief has not had time to settle either. Now the machinery is spinning up again. Guam's governor has declared a state of emergency, and the island moved to a heightened readiness condition Friday afternoon. The guidance from forecasters is specific. All preparations complete by Saturday afternoon, because conditions could begin deteriorating Sunday. In the governor's office on Saipan, one official put the mood plainly: they are getting ready to do it all over again, and the timing could hardly be worse. And on Guam, some residents are quietly hoping the storm's worst passes over their own island, not out of confidence, but to spare their neighbors on Saipan a second direct blow in 3 months. That is where these islands are. Which raises the question underneath this whole story: why does this one patch of ocean keep doing this? To answer that, you have to look at the water these islands are anchored in, because in 2026, it has not stopped working. The Northwestern Pacific is the planet's typhoon factory. It produces nearly a third of all tropical cyclones on Earth, about 26 named storms in an average year by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center's long-term count, 16 or 17 of them reaching typhoon strength. The Marianas sit in the middle of it. On average, a tropical storm or typhoon affects these islands 6 to 7 times a year. The recipe is simple. Ocean water warmer than about 27 degrees Celsius, moist air, and weak crosswinds that let the storm stack up straight. But 2026 is not an average year. The season's first named storm arrived in January, the earliest start in years. By mid-June, 12 tropical cyclones had formed, the most active opening to a season in this basin since 1976. Every single month of 2026 has produced at least one named storm, the first time that has happened since 2015. And the driver has a name too, El Niño, officially declared, layering extra heat onto an ocean that was already warm. And you do not need Bavi to see what that means in practice. As it spins up east of Guam, a second typhoon Jangmi is lashing Okinawa right now, with evacuations ordered across multiple municipalities and hundreds of flights canceled. 2 typhoons, 1 week, 1 basin. The factory is running double shifts. A busy ocean explains how often storms form. It does not explain the thing forecasters actually fear the moment a storm stops growing and starts exploding. What does it take for a storm to double its winds in 2 days? Meteorologists have a precise name for it: rapid intensification, defined as a jump of roughly 35 miles per hour in a storm's maximum sustained winds within 24 hours. Roughly speaking, a Category 1 at breakfast, a Category 3 by the same time tomorrow. Most of the strongest landfalling storms of the past decade carry a rapid intensification chapter in their files. It is the technical term for the thing coastal residents describe more bluntly: the storm that is a nuisance at sunset and a catastrophe by sunrise. The recipe for it starts below the waterline. A typhoon is a heat engine. It runs on the temperature difference between warm ocean and cold upper atmosphere, converting that difference into wind. And like any engine, its output depends on its fuel supply. Warm surface water is not enough because a strong storm churns the sea beneath it, dragging up colder water that would normally choke its own intake. What rapid intensification requires is warm water that runs deep, what scientists call high ocean heat content, a reservoir the storm cannot stir away. Add 2 more conditions: weak crosswinds, so the storm's tower stays stacked and vertical, and moist air through the middle atmosphere, so no dry intrusion poisons the core, and the engine can spin toward its theoretical ceiling. On satellite, you can watch it happen. The cloud field tightens, the eye wall contracts, and an eye snaps into focus like a lens finding its subject. That eye is not decoration. It is the signature of an engine approaching full throttle. Bavi's runway west-northwest toward the Marianas runs across exactly that kind of water, deep, warm, and warmer than usual under a declared El Niño. These are, almost point for point, the conditions that fed Sinlaku in April. Forecasters expect the storm's wind field not just to strengthen but to expand as it approaches, spreading typhoon-force winds across more of the island chain. Now, here is the uncomfortable history behind that forecast. For most of the satellite era, meteorology got steadily better at one question and stayed nearly stuck on the other. Where a storm will go, track forecasting improved decade after decade. How strong it will be when it gets there, intensity barely moved. Rapid intensification sat at the center of that failure. The single hardest call in the field, the one that turned forecasts into apologies. Which is why the most important fact about Typhoon Bavi is not that it is expected to explode. It is that the explosion was announced days before it happened, a Category 4 or 5 call issued while the storm was still minimal, an emergency declared before the first outer band touched land. For most of forecasting history, that sentence would have been impossible to write. So put the advisory clock next to the storm clock. And watch what modern forecasting actually did this week. Now, line up the clocks. Monday, June 29, the Warning Center's daily advisory flags a disorganized area of thunderstorms in the deep tropics east of the islands. Tuesday, June 30, a formation alert goes out. The cluster is organizing. Late Wednesday, it becomes Tropical Storm Bavi, and then the call that matters. On Thursday morning, while Bavi was still just a tropical storm, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center published its forecast. This system would become a typhoon within 24 hours and a super typhoon before reaching the Marianas on Sunday. A Category 4 or 5 prediction issued 3 days ahead for a storm that had existed for barely a day. By early Friday, the first half of that forecast had already verified. Bavi was a typhoon, right on schedule. The second half, the explosion, is the part the weekend will grade. Watch, too, how the forecast has behaved since. Advisory by advisory. In public, the numbers have breathed. The arrival nudged slightly earlier, the track shifted a touch south, the projected peak refined toward 145 to 155 miles per hour. That is not indecision. That is what an honest forecast looks like while new satellite passes and new model runs arrive, a prediction correcting itself out loud. The track itself carries an echo. Bavi's projected path closely resembles Sinlaku's from April, the same approach, toward the same islands. With one meaningful difference, Bavi is expected to keep moving west-northwest after it passes, rather than turning and letting its rain sit over the islands the way Sinlaku did. And the forecasters are equally public about what they do not know. Which island takes the core is still uncertain. Saipan, Tinian, Rota, and Guam are all told to brace as if it were them, because preparation guidance is written for the worst plausible case, not the average one. Intensity carries error bars in both directions. What carries the highest confidence is the least cinematic hazard, bands of torrential rain arriving before, during, and long after the center itself, with flash flooding and landslides likely in the high terrain. So hold the picture. The hardest forecast in meteorology, made in public, days in advance, over the exact islands where it matters most, hedges included. What, precisely, does out of nowhere mean anymore? Let us take that question seriously, and then let us look at what the record actually shows. Here is the most honest version of that fear, the version the record supports, because the fear has a case file, and the file has a name, Otis. October 2023. At midday, Otis was a tropical storm in the eastern Pacific, expected to brush the Mexican coast as nothing extraordinary. Even the final evening forecasts anticipated something far weaker than what arrived. 24 hours later, it slammed into Acapulco, a city of nearly 1 million people, as a top-of-the-scale Category 5, after strengthening by roughly 115 miles per hour in a single day. It made landfall around 1 in the morning, local time, the strongest landfall ever recorded on Mexico's Pacific coast. The official forecast did not see it coming, almost no forecast on Earth did. The models had flagged a modest storm. The ocean built a monster overnight, in the dark, over a sleeping city. At least 50 people were killed, and the damage ran into the billions. Inside the forecasting profession, Otis is spoken of the way pilots speak of a crash, the case everyone studies, because it is the case everyone fears. And the conditions that produced Otis are not receding. Peer-reviewed work over the past decade keeps finding the same trend. Rapid intensification episodes are becoming more frequent over warming oceans, including closer to coastlines, which is precisely where the warning window matters most. One widely cited study of Atlantic storms found the odds of a weak storm exploding into a major hurricane within a day of the coast have more than doubled compared with a generation ago. A storm that explodes 3 days offshore is a forecasting problem. A storm that explodes on final approach is a body count. That is the honest core of the fear, and it deserves to be said plainly. Now hold this week against it. Whatever out of nowhere means, it is not Typhoon Bavi. The explosion was forecast while the storm was still a day old. The super typhoon call went out 3 days before the islands feel the core. A governor declared an emergency while the storm was still more than 600 miles from shore. Preparation deadlines were published 2 full days ahead of the first deterioration. The system did not trail this storm, it led it by days. None of that guarantees a good outcome. It guarantees something rarer, time. And yet the second half of the verdict has to stay honest. Intensity forecasting is probabilistic, not scheduled. What the models actually did this week was recognize an environment primed to explode deep warm water, low shear, moist air, and say so early. What no model can yet do is name the hour of ignition or guarantee that the next Otis will announce itself the way Bavi has. Sharper satellites, better models, and maps of the ocean's stored heat have pushed the odds in the forecaster's favor, but odds are still the currency. Sometimes the storm still outruns the flag. The gap between watching and predicting is real, it is documented, and it is shrinking, but it is not closed. If that sounds familiar, it should. It is the same shape of problem as the sun's flares from our last investigation. Science can name the loaded gun long before it can name the moment it fires. So the verdict on the fear cuts both ways. Meteorology is not blind this week is the proof, playing out in public, advisory by advisory. But it is still nearsighted in one specific, well-documented way, and Otis is the permanent reminder of what lives inside that blind spot. This time, the glasses worked. The islands got days, not hours. In this business, that is the whole game. Because the year 2026 keeps insisting on being part of this story. Look at the ledger. Start the ledger in January. The season's first named storm spun up in the middle of that month, the earliest start to a Pacific typhoon season in 7 years. By mid-June, 12 tropical cyclones had formed, a pace this basin had not managed since 1976. For comparison, the Atlantic, the basin most viewers know best, opened July almost silent. 3 of this year's storms have already made landfall, and together they have killed more than a dozen people, including 8 in the Philippines in February, when a modest tropical storm, not even a typhoon, delivered deadly flooding and a landslide. It did not need to be a monster, it only needed to arrive. April brought the monster. Sinlaku Category 4, equivalent at landfall in the northern Marianas, still the strongest tropical cyclone to strike land anywhere on Earth this year. And this very week, the ledger added 2 entries at once. Jangmi, driving evacuations across multiple Okinawa municipalities and grounding hundreds of flights, with torrential rain still falling, while Bavi spins up behind it, aimed at the Marianas. Then read the Marianas' own case file, because Bavi is walking into a region with scars, some of them still open. October 2018. Super Typhoon Yutu strikes Saipan and Tinian with winds near 175 miles per hour, the strongest typhoon on record near those islands, killing 2, injuring more than 100, damaging the international airport and stripping the vegetation off whole hillsides. May 2023. Typhoon Mawar pushes up to 14 feet of storm surge onto Guam and drops 1 to 2 feet of rain. April 2026, Sinlaku. July 2026, Bavi inbound. Here is the sober frame for all of it. None of this is unprecedented in kind. This basin has always thrown repeat punches. That is what a typhoon factory does. What 2026 is testing is something narrower and harder, the pace and the recovery time the ocean allows between blows. 11 weeks this time, and the recovery time is the one variable no forecast controls. The islands are not unlucky. They are simply standing where a third of the planet's storms are born. Which brings us to the weekend ahead and to the part of this forecast that reaches far beyond these islands. So, where does this leave us? For the Marianas, it leaves a calendar with 3 dates on it. Saturday afternoon, preparations complete, that is the published guidance, not a suggestion. Sunday, conditions begin deteriorating as the outer rain bands arrive. Sunday night into Monday, local time. The core moves through the island chain. At what forecaster's project will be Category 4 or 5 strength, with the exact corridor, Saipan, Tinian, Rota, or Guam still shifting between advisories. Current forecasts keep Bavi at super typhoon strength, near 155 miles per hour, into the start of next week. To be clear about what those numbers mean, at Category 4 and above, the official damage description says well-built homes can lose roofs and walls, trees are snapped or uprooted, and power outages last weeks to possibly months. That is the scale's own language, not a dramatization. The hazards themselves are concrete and documented. Destructive winds near the core, capable of taking apart structures that April already weakened. Storm surge driven over reef-lined coasts, the same coasts where Mawar pushed water 14 feet high in 2023. And the highest confidence threat. Bands of torrential rain before, during, and long after the center passes, with flash flooding and landslides likely in the high terrain. For a power grid still patched together from April, outages measured in weeks are not a worst case. They are a realistic planning case. For the people under this forecast, the storm is not an abstraction about wind speeds. It is tents, tarps, and a grid, taking its second major test in 11 weeks. The guidance to finish preparing by Saturday exists precisely because the final day belongs to the storm, not the hardware store. And then there is the part of this forecast that reaches beyond the islands. After the Marianas, Bavi's projected path keeps it over very warm water, heading west-northwest toward a corridor that includes Japan's Ryukyu Islands, Taiwan, and the coast of eastern China. Tens of millions of people live along that arc. Say this precisely. That is a possibility under active watch, not a forecast. 5 to 8 day tracks move, sometimes by hundreds of miles, and the forecasters themselves say exactly that. but it is the reason weather agencies across East Asia are already reading the same advisories you just heard. The honest verdict on this storm, then, is the opposite of its scariest framing. Typhoon Bobby did not come out of nowhere. It came out of an ocean the entire field has watched run hot all year, in a season that has been breaking pace records since January, and its explosion was announced before it happened, in public, with days to spare. The real story of this week is a warning system doing its job over people who have not finished recovering from the last time it was right. And the real danger was never a surprise storm. It is arithmetic. How many direct hits a record season delivers, how close together they land, and how much recovery time the ocean allows in between. 11 weeks this time. The next interval is not up to us. That is the number to watch in 2026, not any single storm's category, but the spacing between them. So watch the island chains Sunday into Monday as the forecast takes its grade in real time. Watch the westward turn next week as the Ryukyus, Taiwan, and eastern China come into frame. Watch Jiangmi finish its run across Japan. And keep one eye on the season counter still running ahead of any year since 1976, with the busiest months of a typhoon season still to come. We will be tracking all of it as it develops.